this just a chance for a second here. These are the Nocturnes of Chopin, Frederick Chopin. I'd like to start out our time together today with a couple of just little suggestions. English majors are full of free advice. We're actually kind of full of it sometimes, but not today. Today I'm going to prove that my head is a museum of clear ideas, and I want to start out with a couple of life hacks. It is cold, all right? It is cold, and I want to. I try to think of what would be some fantastic music for you to listen to tonight in this terrible cold weather. And Frederick Chopin's Nocturnes, Nocturnes, is my suggestion. You don't have to go out and buy the music. Everything's on YouTube now. If tonight, if you just want a contemplative moment in the dark and the cold, YouTube, do a little search for Chopin's Nocturnes, and then watch this video again and again for deeper meaning. I got curious how cold it was going to get down in southern Minnesota tonight. I thought, wow, I bet it'll be way warmer down there on tonight, the night of Sunday, February 14th. Tonight we're due for 29 below here in central Minnesota. I don't know why they didn't just put 30 on the National Weather Service. You guys, right about the time I get this uploaded and edited and uploaded over at St. John's, you're going to see minus 23 tonight. So, and then it's going to warm up. So just, like I keep saying, keep your head down and your chins up. Another life hack. This is something maybe only a middle-aged man would be interested in. This is the time of the year, just a little hint, where I make geraniums. Or to be more accurate, I make cuttings of geraniums. I do the same thing about every fall. I'm one of the last customers for all the greenhouses around here in central Minnesota. And I always go to Karen's Grow Shack up south of Holdingford. She's got a couple of hoop houses there, and she saves stuff for me. And I'll blast in when it's fire sale time, and I'll grab geraniums and put them on the porch all winter. And I've already reported to you and shown you. They're starting to kick up flowers again. Well, it's middle of February, and here's what you do if you're interested. If you're not interested in geraniums, well then, I'm wasting your time. But if you like geraniums, the smell of geraniums, just messing with the leaves a little bit gives you that fantastic smell. You just make a nice clean cutting, and you get it in a quart of water, and change the water frequently, the little stalks of the plants, and it takes about 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, before they start shooting roots. And right about the time you think they're not going to make it, they do. And then you pot them up, and you can take one geranium plant and turn it into 10, 11, 12 plants and plant them in your garden. And then either go buy more or dig them up and bring them into the house. 3.5 minutes in, and I'm talking about geraniums. My principal subject today is Beowulf. I want to tell you some things about Beowulf. But first, on this Sunday, to repeat something I said generally a couple of days ago to my live Comp 2s before I bid them farewell. I don't want to forget to write that down. I'm just kind of going above the train a little bit. And I mean this in just a sweet way. It's just a fact. It's an observation. When I'm at Central Lakes College, or looking at my little Zoom squares, for years now, I've looked at students and thought, lovingly, I have to emphasize that. I'm thinking, that student may as well be holding a sign right now that says, "I'm just here for the credits." And I love that student. And I also love the other type of student that you'll often encounter in a classroom. That student is a little bit more serious. And you never know when student A is going to turn into student B or student B into student A. I love them both. But I'm interested in both types of students. Either way, you must be glimpsing that you've got an opportunity here in reading this great literature to do something wonderful for your head and for your heart. I'm thinking of a text I got last night from Faustina Duval. It was lonesome for me up in Brainerd, and I'm lonesome for her too. And she misses my stories and my lectures, and I got to text her and tell her I miss her too. And she's that type of student. I encounter both all the time. They're both important to me. It is that second student, though, has probably got more of an interest not just in the credits and the grades, but in the idea of becoming an educated person, of putting beautiful and true and important things in their heart and in their soul. And there's also another distinction, and this is 61-year-old me, right, kind of being 61. Each year as I move through the years, everybody stays the same age and I get older. But even when I was young, even when I was close to the age of many of you, I knew that I was interested in old knowledge, not necessarily new knowledge. And it's become endemic. I mean, it's become a lot more profound. What I see in young people now in the year 2021, working on our third decade of the 21st century. Young people today, with technology and with their phones and with the computers, seem inordinately more interested in new knowledge of the future, than they are the past. New knowledge is brought to us by medicine and science and technology. But I like the old school stuff. I'm not looking forward. I'm looking over my shoulder for philosophy and religion, because I'm a religious person, and culture and history and literature. And with Beowulf, with some of these very old stories, I'm asking you a simple question. Could you possibly open your heart to recognizing that some of these old texts are extraordinary ways to help us understand ourselves, our human reality, and our relationship with the big and indeterminate end of it all? You know, that would be a little something called the universe. What's our relationship with it, if any? I'm going with the old guys, because we're not any smarter. I think there's some proof that we're getting dumber. So I want to start out with a poem by Mark Strand today. I'll tell you a couple things about him. And then I want to talk about Beowulf for a while. I want to talk about Beowulf. And I got some things to say about that. And no drag queens today reading Beowulf, but we had fun with that, I think, the other day. The world's such an amazing place. So just relax, sit back, lower your standards, and resist the temptation to speed this video up. I could talk super slow for those of you that are doing that. Anyway, Mark Strand. I never got to host Mark Strand. There's a billion poets I'm never going to get to host. Too many poets. So many poets, so little time. Is something that I repeat to myself a lot. I've gotten to 28 so far, 29, 30, 31, I think, will be hosted this spring for my Verse Like Water series. That's the tip of the iceberg, although I think I've chosen the best tip. Never got to host Mark Strand. Cancer took him from us a few years ago, but I did get to host and have at my house for a couple, 3 days, the extraordinary poet Charles Simic, who I've already talked about. This is not a book of poetry I'm holding, even though there's a poem in it that I want to read to you. This is Mark Strand's book called The Weather of Words. Most great poets have to create a book that gives us their poetics, which is a fancy word for their theory of poetry, how it works. And what Mark Strand is doing in this particular chapter, excuse me, he is talking about the idea that family photographs, old family photographs, can be a sensational inspiration for art. And I hope you got some. I hope you have photographs of your family that goes back, I don't know how many generations. It's super important. Hang on to every single one of those. You never know when they might need to come in handy. And I kicked this class off with a photograph of my aunts, my sweet aunts, my first heroes. Mark Strand, Bar Giamaica. And again, this is about a photograph. Grace is the focal point, the tip ends of her loosed hair, like match fire in the black light. Her hands in a "here's the church." She's looking at Ugo Mulas, who's looking at us. Ingrid is writing this all down and glances up and stares hard. This still isn't clear. I'm looking at Grace, and Goldstein, and Borsuk, and Dick Venetia are looking at me. Yola keeps reading her book, and that leaves the rest of them. Susan, and Elena, and Carl Glass, and Thorpe, and Schimmel, and Jim Gates, and Hobart, and Schneeman. one afternoon in Milan in the late spring. Then Ugo finishes, drinks the coffee, and everyone goes away. Summer arrives and winter. The snow falls and no one comes back. Ever again. All of them gone through the star filter of memory with its small gravel and metal tables and passers-by. I love that poem so much. I've read it many times. A couple allusions to the things I love in that poem. The star filter of memory. What is that? And that line that didn't finish. Somebody's hands in a, here's the church and here's the steeple. Open the door and see all the people. We used to do that on the playground when we were kids, and I wonder if kids are still doing that. Makes me want to hope so. Probably another thing that's gone the way of all, that's passed among forgotten things is the idea of maps, and I'd like to show you one here in a moment. I was looking at my Zoom squares here Friday morning with my neck hurting me a little bit because it's sick of looking down. And I said, okay, how many of you take any pleasure in looking at maps? Do any of you have an interest in cartography? Not a lot of hands went up in the air. I think one or two went up, and then I got a couple of wavery hands, which is the Zoom way of saying, I don't know, Johnson. And my thought then, and I said it, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm asking young people about maps in the year 2021. Well, we don't need maps anymore, really, because we got our phones. And, I'll do it too. I'll pick up my phone and ask it. I'll say, Siri, take me somewhere. And most of the time she does. So we're losing that cartography thing. And there's some evidence now that using our phones to get around using a GPS device is actually harming our ability to navigate the topography of the terrain of the earth. Think about that. We used to have to look at a map. And I'll still do it all the time with Google, though. Like if I'm going to a town for a college and schools visit, I've never been there before, I will look at it map-wise, and then I'll switch it out to satellite view so I can see the fields and the woods and if there's any water near that town or wherever I'm going. It puts it in my head because I'm old-fashioned. Taking a little too long to tell you that I love maps. Weirdly, paradoxically, I'm not a traveler. I hardly go anywhere. If I never left the state of Minnesota again, my attitude is great. So what? I love Minnesota. I don't need any other where than here. I just don't. If I wanted to be somewhere else, I would. And maybe my Travelin' Jones, which seems to be completely dead, will come back, but I don't think so. Let's take a little bit of a quick look at. And I love old-timey maps that are hand-painted, hand-drawn. Here's a map of Rome. I don't like it necessarily, but it does a pretty good job of letting you see how vast the Roman Empire was at one point. The Romans were all about real estate, and oh my gosh, did they grab some. The Roman Empire, as you can see, extended as far south as northern Africa, as far east as Armenia, and all the way northwest, the biggest directions of them all, to France, to Spain, to England, all the way up to Scotland, and where Hadrian's Wall is. And that's a lot of real estate, okay? All kinds of, and Rome went the way of all empires. Every empire is going to go, and that includes the empire that you and I happen to live in, the United States of America. We are going to go the way of all empires eventually, and things will get reorganized. But Rome, lots of reasons for why it fell, right? Oh, there was lead in the pipes. I've heard that one before. I've heard the one about Rome getting corrupt, and holy cow, did they ever. They really did become a corrupt people. There's a theory, too, that they just spread out too far, that those Roman soldiers got so far from home that they forgot who they were serving. They went local. They started marrying local girls and wearing fur and stuff, and had more allegiance to the local barbarian lords than they did to the emperor at home. And I love thinking about this stuff and wondering about this stuff. I get that feeling that I keep trying to communicate to you, that we're doing something important. I have a book here that I'll spare you the cover of. It's I think it's up here behind me somewhere. It's called The Perrin Thesis. It was written by a French guy who made the argument, Perrin, and I got this book in 1980, courtesy of Dr. Camilla Franklin when I was studying medieval history, ancient history. The argument that Perrin made is that what happened is the church became so influential as Rome became Christianized then what happened is all the future young bureaucrats started flocking towards serving the church instead of the body politic. They chose the body paideia, to just whip out a Latin word on you. And that, if you want to have an empire, future empire builders, you need administrators. So keep that in mind. So what happened when Rome fell in 449? We had all these people in the north who I'm descended from: the Geats, the Jutes, the Celts, the Gauls, the Visigoths, and principally the Germanic tribes. These guys were in a little bit of trouble because Rome kind of conquered them and then kept them safe at the same time, kept them from fighting with one another. And you can't have barbarian tribes beating each other up. That's not a way to organize a civil society. And so what happened was these tribes had to sort of get reorganized in a big way. And it was the very early beginning of the kingdoms that Rome would eventually, Western Europe would become. And I love the idea of a king. I love the idea of a kingdom, that order. And I've been talking about that with my honors lit class. It's finishing up King Lear this week. I'd love to see those come back. But here's the deal. I'm trying to set some context for Beowulf here. That's my subject for the next 12, 13, 14 minutes. Trying to keep this under half an hour every time. Doing okay on that, I think. What basically what happened is, and you're going to smell this in Beowulf a little bit, they were Christianized. Okay, missionaries went forth and they converted all of these primitive people to the church. But there's some nuances here and some things that you need to understand. Their mythologies were powerful. Their literature, word-wise, spoken word-wise, went back centuries. And all that got destroyed. A lot of it got just trashed right out to their mythologies. Now, some of that stuff is still with us. We know that the Anglo-Saxons, the Germanic people, believed in the idea of the Valkyries. These women who would sweep down after a war, after a battle, and gather up all the souls of the warriors who had fought well and take them to Valhalla, to their version of heaven. And some of this is with us even with our days of the week, right? Sunday is named after the sun. Monday is the day of the moon. Wednesday is named after Woden. Thursday after Thor, and so forth. So look at a calendar, and this is still with us, and I love that idea. But the principal thing to know is that the Germanic tribes, if your king converted, you converted. That Germanic king knew about Greece and Rome, and he knew that Greece and Rome in Christian culture was superior. So they would convert. But don't forget, try to keep in mind that, and you'll smell this in Beowulf, they were polytheistic. They believed in more than one god. That's an old story. That's an old question that goes back to the Greeks. How many gods are there? Are there none? Is there just one? Or are there many? Socrates was executed for, among other things, believing in more or less monotheism. The idea that there's only one god ruling the universe. And they killed him for that. But a thing to know is that the Anglo-Saxons, because they were polytheistic, one more god was like nothing. Okay, yeah, come on, Jesus, you can just join us and you're going to be up there with Thor and Loki and Woden, which I think is important. It's a thing to know. The Beowulf poet, I also want you to know now. Here's the thing that's interesting to me, and I just found this out. I just learned this last week, the day before class, preparing for class, reading Jorge Luis Borges's book called Lessons in English, A Class in English Literature. That's the name of that book. And the first 3 chapters, which I'll cite as my source here for some of these ideas, is all about Beowulf and the Anglo-Saxons. And Borges teaches me that in the olden days, probably when I was like a kid, we thought that Beowulf was just this barbaric poem. But Borges advises me to advise you that somewhere along the line, a German scholar came along and realized that many passages of the famous Roman epic, the Aeneid, which is about a badass hero named Aeneas, were woven into Beowulf. Like entire passages, entire lines. And the lines were originally in Latin, right? And this was written in the Finnesburg transcript that was found. The only copy of Beowulf is Anglo-Saxon. So what does that mean? It means almost certainly that the Beowulf poet was not some primitive dude wearing fur writing a kid's story. It was a priest conducting a Baroque experiment, trying to unite the culture of the Anglo-Saxons with the culture of Rome. And I love that so much. So this is basically an Anglo-Saxon Aeneid. And I just discovered that in time for my 61st year. Now, the thing is, when the Christian missionaries came along, they had kind of a conundrum because they believed that all of the old gods that the Anglo-Saxons were worshiping were actually demons. But they had to be careful because the kings wanted to keep worshiping them. So to say to those people, you know, you're worshiping demons would be a good way to get beat up or worse. And so they had to kind of tiptoe around that idea. This poet could not mention Christ, could not mention the Virgin Mary at all. They're mentioned nowhere. And we don't know if the Beowulf poet knew what a contradiction this was, but you are going to see the word God in the poem. And you'll see the pantheon of Anglo-Saxon gods, the Old Norse gods too. But the word God appears, and so does a very important word to the Anglo-Saxon people, which was where, I think I'll probably brutally pronounce this wrong, word, W-Y-R-D. We still have that word. It's still with us. It was important to them because the word meant fate or destiny. That was huge to them. And Shakespeare grabs that word and he uses it when he writes Macbeth, if you've read that. And that's why we have him referring to them, the witches, as the three weird sisters. And I love that. Also, the observation could be made that it looks on the surface like he's just making a kid's story, like a fairy tale, because this has an ogre, and it has a witch, and it has a dragon in it. But once the poet pulled the trigger on that legend, don't you see? He has to have an ogre, a witch, and a dragon, because his audience would have been expecting it. They were essential. The audience wanted those monsters because they were important to them. They represented evil. So these are a big deal. And if you're thinking Shrek right now, that's fine. If that helps you understand the story or appreciate it, the ogre and the witch and the dragon are absolutely essential. And there we have a dragon again, like the one Gregory slain, like the one that caused such heck at the beginning of Genesis with Adam and Eve and that apple. I've only got a couple more points to make, and then I got a new idea to introduce to you. Without a doubt, the most vivid scenes, I think, we talked about this the other day, and Friday, you're probably going to remember only the fighting, right? The horrible fighting, the beheading of the monster, etc. But this is also a lot of the poet was very concerned with social relationships, guys hanging out. And I know there's not a lot of women walking around, but this is kind of about the social life of Anglo-Saxon men. Feasting, hanging out, boasting, giving speeches, telling stories, giving rings, drinking too much mead, which is another thing we talked about Friday, and I don't want to talk about that right now. It's a terrible wine made out of honey, and it'll give you a headache, so knock it off. Don't be careful with alcohol, you guys, especially all you really young ones. Where was I going with that idea? The most vivid scene for me, and it's coming your way. And I want you to know that they did this. The business of putting their kings, when they died, the kings that they loved, on ships to send them out to sea. They did that. They did that. Now, I've made a joke, and I made a joke to my students, and it made them smile the other day. And I have said it. I have said to my English department at Central Lakes College, my beloved brothers and sisters, 9 of us, best English department in the state, as good as the Riverland English department, which I'm also a part of, in a small way. I've told my brothers and sisters in English, Deb Block and Fort and Leanne and Brandy and Adam, the whole crew, I've said, when I die, take my body out to my little pontoon and take all my poetry books and pile them on me, all of them. There's hundreds of them. and then take some lighter fluid and cover it real good, and then just set it on fire, and then push me out to the lake so I can head west, because my house faces west. I'm joking. That actually is not where how I'm going to go. I'm going to be buried at St. Anna at Immaculate Conception. But the joke is there: English major on flames, English major flambe, an English major who loves and has read Beowulf. The Anglo-Saxons did this. Ships were living things to them. Think about that. I don't even think that way about my pontoon as much as I love it. My pontoon is not a living thing. To me, it's the littlest, junkiest boat in the state. But a ship was it was a creature. And they would take these kings and they would put them in the boats and pile all their stuff, their weapons, treasure that they have, gold, silver, the utensils that they ate and drank with. Sorry, even their pets, right? And how do we know this? That it's not just legend? Because we have found many ships at the bottom of the sea with the skeletal remains of these kings, with their favorite dogs at their feet, and all their stuff way down at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And they were pushed out to head west where the sun sets, because that's where everyone thought that you went, that your soul went. That's where they thought the location of Valhalla was. And it's just ritualistic behavior towards the dead. How can that not be interesting? One final comment here, and then I got to talk about one more thing. I told my students, they were unconvinced, my CLC students, my Comp 2 students, when I said, you guys, it's fantastic to be reading Beowulf while it's cold, while it's super, super cold. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, here's the thing to know. When Beowulf was written in the 9th century, Europe was way, way, way colder. And we know this because Germany back then was covered with reindeer. Imagine that. There's not a reindeer in Germany right now. They're in the far northern parts of Scandinavia. It was way, 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 way colder than it is now. And the other day, it was such a great moment. I'm dying to have students help me. And I'm pointing towards my screen because that's where the student was. I said, I don't know why it got so cold. Maybe it was a volcano. Well, teaching assistant Tristan Pierce, a little bit of an older guy. He's in his mid-20s, going for law enforcement. Complete sweetheart, dad, a couple beautiful children. His Zoom square lit up and he says, hey, I just did a big paper on that. The reason why it was colder is because the sun was acting up back then. The sun was changing and having all kinds of storms. I'm like, I'm so glad I know that. And I haven't looked it up yet, but I told him I would. He's probably exactly right. The sun has a big effect on climate. And then I scared all my students. They didn't want to hear this. Tristan couldn't quite remember what the technical name was for a solar storm. Well, I know what it is because I think about it all the time because I'm making my living online. I don't know if we've talked about this yet, even last fall with Comp 1. Maybe I mentioned it. Every once in a while, the sun spits up a terrible solar storm. They're called coronal mass ejections, and all that radiation comes towards the planet. The last big time it happened was in 1849 with the Carrington incident. There were telegraph wires across the country on fire. Operators of telegraphs were electrocuted. We almost had one of those, I think in the year 2012. Had it happened I can't remember, either a week earlier or a week later, or if it happens next week, to cut to it, if a CME comes, and it will, I don't want it to come in my lifetime, nor do I want it to come in yours. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we get a CME. Everything's going to be bricked out. Everybody's phone is going to be dead. Every computer on Earth is going to be fried. And there's going to be chaos because most people have no more than 3 or 4 days of food in their refrigerators. So why am I ending on such a gloomy note? I'm almost to the 30-minute mark, which means this is going to cut. I got a camera so smart, it tells me when to shut up. Finish Beowulf by Wednesday. I'm also going to put something your way too that we can't ignore. There's got to be a little bit of back and forthness between. I try to keep my stuff in each class tight, and it gets hard because it bleeds back and forth, and students take more than one class from me. And here's the thing: I got to grab something out of my classical mythology class for us, and I'm upset that I left the book in the glass porch where I was having light issues. That's why I'm in here. There's absolutely no way. I'm just going to put it simply, and then I'll conclude this. We cannot have a course with a theme of heroes, studying great heroes, without dealing with one of the most formidable intellectuals of the 20th century, and that's a guy named Joseph Campbell, who's the preeminent expert on mythology, a big deal in American culture. Joseph Campbell wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And his first chapters on the hero's journey are just basic. This is just Hero Study 101. You just got to do it. And but he's going to be work, okay? So get some coffee and get some Frédéric Chopin music, and I will post up a virtual copy of his book for you, because I stole it off the internet fair and square as a pirate on the high seas of the internet. So we're not going to read the whole book, don't worry about that, but you got to know who he is. Without him, we'll talk about this a little bit with our next lesson. Only 2 this week because of next week, because of President's Day. It is George Lucas, the famous George Lucas, that used Joseph Campbell's theories to create Star Wars. In other words, he very deliberately created a modern mythology. And I know, any Star Wars fans? That makes me want to go find a Luke Skywalker pick for Severus Skywalker. Stay safe and well, you guys. I love you.